Hello, everyone, and welcome to Future Nonprofit, a podcast and YouTube channel where we sit down with industry experts, both in and out of the nonprofit space, to talk about how to build and scale the nonprofits our world needs tomorrow. I'm your host, Ted Vaughn, the co-author of Culture Built My Brand and the co-founder of Historic Agency. If you have not yet checked out the audio version of Future Nonprofit, it is a highly produced, amazing 20 to 30-minute journey through each of our guests' stories. Be sure and check that out. Like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts or here on YouTube. And I hope you really enjoyed today's episode. We talked to some amazing people. Okay, first question. You are speaking on a very large stage, which I know you've done before, but for 2026, you have to have the same piece of walk-in music accompany you onto that platform every single time. What piece of music does Jessica choose as her walk-in accompaniment?
You know, I've never analyzed the lyrics, but I really like Take On Me. It's kind of my karaoke song. So I feel like that would get me in a great mood and be funny and not totally make sense. It'd be a conversation starter. That's my gut reaction. It's been the song of the moment, you know? Oh, wait, no, I have a better answer. Are you ready?
Yeah.
I would have my very musical son, my third son. I would have him accompany me. He is a drummer and a pianist and a bass player. So he's even written some of his own songs. I would have Asa mix it up and play whatever he's playing at the moment. If he had to stick to one song for the year, he could do that too. But that's what I would choose. That would be amazing.
Okay. Last question. If you had to describe, what you do for a living to a 4-year-old, what would your kind of 4-year-old answer be to help them navigate what you do?
I have a ready-to-go answer for this as well, and I've done this before, actually. So what I talk about is I ground them in a world they understand and know. So I say, you know how when you're at the playground and you wait for your turn on the swings, on the slide, on whatever you're into, not everyone gets turns. Not everyone gets the same number of turns. But my job is to try to make it the case that everyone gets a turn, everyone gets fair turns, and that they have everything they need to make the most out of that turn. So I talk about that, and I talk about opportunity as the thing that we want to make sure everyone has. Access to opportunities.
I love that. That's such a great answer. Okay, so story of origin. So what I find in having done a lot of these conversations is that people in the space of social impact, social enterprise, making the world better, whether that's through for-profit or nonprofit, which is becoming, I think, a blurrier line, but people who have dedicated their life to giving back or doing something proactive and meaningful to make the world better. There's something in their story of origin, whether it's a redeemed trauma or it's an influential parent or it's a coach, there's something. Let's think about your story of origin. Who is that person or influential figure that today you still think about or has most maybe shaped who you are and what you're doing in this space today?
It's a pair of people, and it is my parents. I feel like I have so clearly have had love privilege my whole life. I have always been surrounded by such safety and support. And I think about, as I became a parent over the last 14 and a half years with my 4 kids, I've thought and learned a lot about attachment theories and the idea that I've always felt so safe to circle out in wider and wider loops out into the world and to have adventures and to take risks. I've always felt not just that it would be okay to come back home, but that I would always be accepted. I would always be welcomed. I would always be encouraged. And that, in fact, at some point, I had adventures that were much farther beyond my parents' own experiences. I literally went farther than they had in terms of geography. And they trusted me to do that. They supported me to do that, even though I think they were very worried at certain points about some of the adventures I had proposed. So that safety came from deep love, a real generosity and grace in their parenting. And just, they're a happy and joyful and really inspired and inspiring duo. So my mom was an educator for 43 years. I mean, she still is, but formally as a teacher, and mostly to younger grades. So she's sort of the kid whisperer. And I just grew up loving learning, having so much fun in school, so much fun outside of school learning. My dad has been an entrepreneur since the beginning. He's had a lot of different rounds of that. And so I think you put those things together and it's not that difficult to psychoanalyze me, and why maybe most of the things I've done have been to support entrepreneurs and to help others get engaged and inspired by the stories of those entrepreneurs and wanting to learn more and go deeper and connect with those stories and with those individuals. I'm a pretty straightforward person, I guess.
Oh, I think we'll find all sorts of complexity and things underneath that surface, Jessica. Let's talk about your earliest memories of what you wanted to be when you were growing up. Like I was a kid growing up watching Lee Majors on this TV show called The Fall Guy, where he was a stuntman. And I was like, that's the coolest thing ever. I want to be a stuntman. Like, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
I wanted to be a helper. I wanted to be an encourager. I actually made business cards, and a friend made business cards for me at one point. This was more high school, but they said freestyle encourager. I just thought, you know what the world needs is someone to go around and high five everyone and say, you're doing a really good job. Like, I see you. You're doing your best. Keep it up. And I remember carrying that version of what I wanted to be, even still today a little bit. But I say helper because I was very, very influenced by what I learned at church. And I remember Sunday school lessons. I've written about this in my book and elsewhere, but I remember hearing scripture that told me that even though God is God, we are supposed to help. We get to help. Like, who would have thought God needs help? So how do we do that? Well, we find people in need. We find people who are suffering and we show up. And then there's quite an art and a science to what happens next. And you can show up with great intentions and end up not being truly helpful. But that's what I wanted to do. And so I certainly didn't know the logistics of as a kid, of how to find and serve and listen well and respond to needs and, follow any sort of version of this human-centered design process that has guided a lot of what I've done. But I knew that I wanted to be somebody that looked around for ways to be useful and to be helpful in a way that was redemptive, in a way that was not just my own version of things.
Was being helpful, you have such energy and bubbleness to your personality. And I imagine that was the case when you were younger. Did you have a lot of friends? Were you popular? Were you like in the circles, or were you on the outside of the circles of influence and popularity?
As a kid, I had this very formative series of experiences. I haven't thought about this or talked about this. This is so funny. I remember, I've talked to my family about this, but kindergarten, my very best friend in the whole world moved away in the summer. First grade, my very best friend moved away. Second grade, my very, very best friend that I had made again, she ended up moving away. I remember she moved to San Francisco and I felt like it was the moon. This happened again and again. And I adapted by continuing to make close friends, but also I never fit into one group, that's for sure. I was a bit of a hoverer, what's it called when a floater. I didn't feel unwelcome in any particular group. I feel like I could bridge groups, but that was really an important piece of how I ended up, forming friendships and bonds and seeing myself, having my identity form in middle school and high school. I also moved myself the last day of 8th grade. I remember I went to school. My house had been, in boxes. I came home, everything had been packed up, house was empty, and we got in a car and we drove to the other side of Pittsburgh, a different suburb where I would go to high school. And so the summer before 9th grade, it was very Hallmark movie-ish looking back, right? Like summer before 9th grade, I got my braces off. I'm not even kidding you. I was ready to enter this new school, and I understood that I got to decide who I wanted to be. And I knew that there were 3 middle schools merging into the high school. So I thought, well, look, I'm not that far off of everyone else. Everyone else only knows a third of the people. I know 0, but it's not that much of a difference. It could be worse. And I remember showing up and deciding really, there's a lot of language around leadership and service. And I knew, again, in the spirit of wanting to be a helper, I knew I wanted to show up and I wanted to lead. And so I showed up, I said hello to every single person I crossed paths with. I made a bunch of friends really quickly. And then had this strange thing happen where I decided I wanted to run for student body president. And so I did that. And that was a role that I served all 4 years in high school and then all 4 years in college. And there was a twist to this where I was on a program called Semester at Sea, my junior year. And I just had decided, I was having a really deep, interesting spiritual moment. And I decided I would really test myself in terms of my reliance on vanity and other pieces of my identity. So I shaved my head and I wrote a letter that I knew a friend would probably sign me up to run for like senior class president, right? The big culmination of all the things. You got to give the graduation speech and do all the fun stuff after maybe not as fun of a role for freshman, junior, senior year, freshman, sophomore, junior. So anyway, senior year, I wrote this note. I'm like, you know what, God, I'm going to give up all the things that I might rely on for my identity other than you. And so I write this letter. Somehow it never arrived. Somehow someone signed me up. Somehow I won, even though there were other people in the running and I wasn't even on campus. So I find out at the end of this journey where to me I'd given these things up and was trying really hard, just really praying my way to like, I just want to rely on you, God. And then I got these things back and it was your hair grows back, yeah. But I also got this other piece back of my role as this leader with a title and a role on campus. And it felt like I got to live that out in a different way. So that's my answer to your question. Who was I? I was both on the outside, but also I saw myself very clearly as a leader and a servant leader.
Talk about the journey, your career journey, and kind of now in this second chapter, you're making decisions about college, about your future, and kind of emerging into your early career. Kind of walk us through that season of your life and journey.
I think for a while I grew up both understanding that I could do anything, but it was so unclear to me what all the anythings were. And I still thought there were categories, like you had to pick from some finite list. And I don't know where I got that, but I just thought, well, there are a handful of major things you can be: doctor, lawyer, teacher, business person, whatever. And for business, by the way, I just had a terrible understanding of what it was. I'm not quite sure, again, where this came from too, but you think about all the stories we hear around. There's a correlation between wealth and being the evil genius or the evil, the villain in the story, right? Lex Luthor, Scrooge McDuck, whatever you want. There's always a guy that's like the bad rich guy. And they're business people. I genuinely thought, now my tune has changed and we'll get there, but I genuinely thought growing up, well, business is bad, business is evil. Business is about taking people's money and kind of tricking them to buy stuff they don't need or want. And it's about greed and taking and selfishness. And it's just not a thing I want to do. Like, why try to come up with a thing that, again, I didn't see a lot of the beauty and there's so much more to the story now. But this is how I thought growing up. So I thought, well, they're the takers. I want to be a part of the givers. If for-profits are takers, I guess nonprofits are the givers. I'll go there. Sounds good enough. Sounds good to me. It was a very like black and white way of seeing the world. And so as I went to college, there's no real clear path for going into the nonprofit sector. And I had been so supported, so encouraged. There was nothing about my college experience that I believed had to be super practical, if you will, or I was just told to study what I loved. And I loved poetry and I loved philosophy. And I was fascinated by political science. I sort of thought in a very simplistic way, well, there's stuff that needs fixed in the world. Who's in charge? Is it people in political positions? Well, let's figure that system out. Let me figure that out and how power plays into things. And then maybe I'll be better equipped to fix stuff later. Philosophy, I just loved peeling back assumptions, asking hard questions. It was right in line with the sort of practices I had built, having a spiritual foundation already. Gleaning meaning out of texts, asking deep questions, reflecting, it was great. And then poetry was just a wonderful way for me to slow down. There's a lot of white space on the page, really distilling language into these beautiful things that scratch the itch of expression. Like, oh, that's what I mean. I'm going to show, not just tell, what it feels like to whatever, see the sunrise or whatever the thing's about. So anyway, I loved all those things. And I just studied what I loved without any thought as to exactly what it would lead to after. And so senior year came, there's not a lot of nonprofits make their way to central Pennsylvania, job fairs. And so I didn't quite know what to do. And I always say this if I'm speaking to college students. I say, hey, the next part is not necessarily prescriptive. I'm just letting you know what I did. And so what I did was I graduated with my beautiful newly minted philosophy and poetry, degrees. And I moved to California on a whim because I had a boyfriend there. It was not in any way a strategic career move. In fact, I ended up I didn't have a job. I just moved and I handed out my resume, paper resume, quite old school. This was 2000. And I happened to live across the street from Stanford's campus. I was in a house with a bunch of other folks on Sand Hill Road, which if anyone knows the Bay Area and knows Sand Hill Road, it's basically VC firms and apartment buildings. There were at the time, before the road sort of got changed, there were like a dozen houses. We lived in one of those houses. I lived with about a dozen people in a 3-bedroom. We had a guy in a tent in the backyard who paid like $50 to use the toilet. We had a guy, it was just chaos. It was not, again, I'm not saying go do this, recent grads, but it was fun and wonderful and an adventure. And I walked across Sand Hill Road to Stanford, handed out my resume, and 3 days into this very, again, not super strategic process, I got a temp job as an administrative assistant for someone on medical leave in, drumroll, the Stanford Graduate School of Business. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm in the lion's den. I can't believe I'm with all these people setting business. These are the bad guys, but I'll protect my soul and show up every day and get money to pay my rent and I'll figure the rest out. And I was so afraid. I was so there's nothing for me here except to get paid and do my admin job for a few months until I really figure out where I want to be. I was so worried about it that eventually I even got a second job and I lived in a home for teen moms where I was the house mom. So by day I was on Stanford's campus doing that job, but in the evenings I would drive back home. I would make sure the girls got dinner, help them with their homework, make sure all the babies went. It was 3 or 4 girls at a time and their little ones. And I'd make sure everyone was safe and sound, sort of be the adult on the premises. The next morning, I would drive the girls to the bus stop or school. I would make sure the kids got to daycare. I had many car seats in the back of my little Honda Civic hatchback. And then I would go to Stanford, which was not as important in my mind, but it just so happened that it was there. And not just anywhere at the business school. I happened to land in the Center for Social Innovation. Those words didn't really mean much to me. That's where I was. I learned very quickly that I had landed in exactly the right place because I started to see how business skills, entrepreneurial thinking, could be used to solve social problems. I had no idea. And I met real people that became my heroes, became people that I wanted to follow in those footsteps and follow their paths. So social entrepreneurs, people who were doing venture philanthropy, people who were doing environmental entrepreneurship, so many incredible, incredible people who showed up either to teach or as MBA students that ended up going out into the world and doing incredible things, moving people and resources around in these really thoughtful ways, all for the same goals that I had in my heart, or for the same intentions, right? So that's that was me a few years out of undergrad, really inspired. I happened to land in the right place, be exposed to this idea of social entrepreneurship, which, by the way, I look back and now I understand the space and the field a lot differently. I thought it was just new to me. It was actually new to the world. That was in 2000 and 2001. Greg Dees was one of the first to sort of write about it. He has formative papers. Bill Drayton started to talk about it. So it was kind of new to the world. And I happened to land in a place where they were talking about it. And I thought, oh, that's what I want to do.
But the spark to make the world better was always a part of your vision for your life, even going back to being a kid, the helper, and to this day, it sounds like that's still how you show up in the world. You want to help make the world better, not have power, not collect money, not influence. It sounds like you're somebody who ultimately is motivated by care for people more than big entrepreneurial systems and structures.
Yes. And I think back to as a kid learning and misinterpreting all sorts of stuff, but scripture, like what you do for the least of these, you do for me. What is more exciting in the world than getting to be a part of God's work, getting to encounter something holy and so much bigger than yourself through service, through showing up and like often when you live in privilege, like I have for my whole life, and not even super fancy privilege, but I am a white middle-class American, and that's good enough. I feel like you have to seek out a lot of suffering. You have to seek out the individuals and the communities that are living differently from you. And there's a reason to do that. There's a beauty and a joy and hey, here's what it looks like to be a human on this planet. It gives you perspective. It gives you grounding. And I also have to say, I wrote a 20 lesson series at the end of last year about lessons I learned from Kiva. And one of them it's funny, I wasn't being that thoughtful about when I was posting it. I got carried away, and I think I posted 8 different to be continued pieces on like a Friday night, because I got going on this idea that there's actually a lot of business advantage to choosing to be a nonprofit, to have your organization be a nonprofit. And I can talk about that. But I think about the real opportunities that exist in the impact space. Often there are problems that are fascinating to work on. If impact is really your currency, you really want to get change done, you really want to serve people who are suffering. It's a little bit of a bummer to say, but there's often stuff to work on that like few people are working on or are working on in that particular way. There's so much space for disruption and to be creative and to be bold and take risks, smart risks. It's just it's sort of like if you look at what makes a great entrepreneurial opportunity, what factors are out there that could lead you to a great entrepreneurial opportunity in the business world, there's a lot of that happening in spaces that get overlooked to serve people who are by the nature of things overlooked. And so I've always just found it so curious that it's not more popular, I guess, to look at the world this way. Like, if you want to find interesting work, oh my goodness, have I got some good news for you? There's a lot out there. It's just not necessarily obvious how you do these other things that people chase. I don't have any desire to make many millions of dollars. I just don't care. I have all my needs met. My family's taken care of. Everything's fine. And so if you're able to understand what enough is financially in your life, oh my goodness, then you don't have to try to force another path that to me would be very inauthentic and truthfully just not that interesting.
I have so many themes I'm writing down that I want to revisit at the end today that I think will tie back to all these things we're talking about. But I don't want to miss kind of a critical chapter in your life, and I'm sure something that gives you a bit of awareness in the eyes of our audience, and that is Kiva. Talk about the journey of starting, building Kiva, and exiting it.
I was 3 years into that job at Stanford. I stayed late after work one day in the fall of 2003 because a guy named Dr. Muhammad Yunus was coming to campus to talk. And it was 3 years before he and his Grameen Bank would win the Nobel Prize, Nobel Peace Prize for their pioneering work in modern microfinance. At the time, he had written a book. I think his book was out by then, but he was called like The Banker to the Poor. I'm pretty sure his book was out. But that's how people were talking about him. And I thought, that's weird. What is this? And I was suspicious. I thought it sounded sketchy. So I stayed late after work, went to this lecture that was really just supposed to be for students, but I crashed everything for a while. I did go back and pay to get my actual MBA there later, but that wasn't then. So I stayed at this lecture, and I sat in the back on the steps near the door because I thought it would be done and I would figure this guy out quickly and just get on with my evening. And I was riveted. He talked about modern microfinance and in particular small loans to, provide opportunity and change the lives of somebody who's working hard at their own micro enterprise, and what a tiny, tiny bit of capital can do in the hands of somebody motivated with training and support. It was just beautiful. So he talked about that. He talked about his own journey, starting with being a really great listener. Yes, he happened to have a lot of other qualifications, but what I pulled out of that was like, wait, you can start great work by being a great listener? I can do that. Even my I didn't know what to put on my resume, my philosophy and poetry, and I didn't know what my skills were at the time, but I knew I loved people and I have a huge heart for people, and I just don't get tired of hearing somebody tell their story. ever. So I was like, I can do that. And then third, so microfinance, wow, you can start great work by being a great listener. Wow. But then third, he talked about the poor, economically and socioeconomically disadvantaged people in a way that didn't make me feel guilty or shameful about my own relative privilege, which was usually the way I encountered stories like that through well-intentioned marketing materials of nonprofits and NGOs that wanted me to do a specific thing at the end of those stories, which was to like give my money and then go on with my day, right? And not necessarily want or need more because they were going to go do the thing itself. And that always just felt so weird to me, like because of the currency that mattered wasn't, I want to go try to make a lot of money. I believed, and I still believe, actually, I just wrote a kid's book about this. Do I have it in my office? I can show you. Anyway, I wrote a kid's book about giving, and this is the core of it. I still believe that the best thing we have to give is ourselves, our time, our energy, our ideas, our working hours. I mean, do the thing itself, right? I God bless people that go do the other thing, right? Make a lot of money and then give it away. That's great. There's a role for that as well. But for me personally, that was never going to be my path. I just didn't want to do it that way. So when I would hear these stories and be told that my role in this grand unfolding of events is to just play a part, be a character who gives money and let someone else do the work, I didn't like that. So when I heard him Yunus talk about the entrepreneurial poor, not as people that only had one facet of, their stories as well, the facet and the set of topics and ideas that would get me to feel terrible and give. I heard about people who were smart and strong and hardworking, just didn't have access to opportunity and capital the way that I had during my own life for student loans and whatever else. It unlocked something for me. And it sounds small, but I was so motivated. And I thought, well, if that's true, if that character is different in this story, then I can play a different role in the story too. And I was so compelled that I ended up cold calling a bunch of nonprofits, and one of them gave me an unpaid internship like 3 months later. And I ended up moving to Kenya. And I was in Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania for about 4 months, unpaid, back when that was like not a big deal. It was my big break. I mean, I love that I had this unpaid internship with a nonprofit that allowed me to hear stories in person on the ground for real from people that had received $100 in funding. And that galvanized my understanding that there was a different story to be told about the lives of a lot of the individuals that I thought I'd heard about for my whole life, but I didn't really know. That led to some what-if questions, really basic things, and actually a lot of them born out of naivete. So what if I stayed in touch with these new friends? What if instead of telling the same story about sadness and suffering and desperation and hopelessness that's always been told about them and about, I hate to otherize and make a category, but it's just how the world does it, right? What if I could tell a different story, an entrepreneurial story? And what if instead of asking people to give and then go away and that was it, what if we could engage and have connection and the story keeps going? What if we could use a loan, not only because that's what my new friends in Uganda and Kenya and Tanzania wanted. What if we could ask for a loan? What if during the repayment, we have not just capital, but information about the unfolding of the story and the impact happening go back to lenders? Wouldn't that be a really fun experiment to run? So never thinking that it would, in my wildest dreams, I thought it would be throughout East Africa. We started in Uganda and I thought someday we'll expand to Kenya and Tanzania and beyond. And it turned out that we did that really fast and it kept going. But in the very beginning, it was 7 new friends. They needed about $3,100. People handed me $20. My grandma handed me a $20. I remember this. But people loaned a little bit of money. We, at no interest, we sent it over to the new friends. They repaid it and we were off to the races. And so the first year that Kiva existed, after that little pilot round, it was 2005, October of 2005. We ended up lending $500,000 to folks throughout that area and a few other countries. The next year, we ended up lending about $15 million. The next year was up to 40. The next a little over 100. And Kiva's closing in on $3 billion in loans today. And what's important to note, if this is new for anyone listening, the experience remains very, very much the same as it did 20 years ago. I can't believe it's been 20 years, but it has. 20 years ago, do you have $25 or more extra? Okay, well, you can choose somebody whose story and profile is on the site. Maybe it's a goat herder or a seamstress or a farmer or anyone else. You can lend them a little bit of money, and over time, they're going to repay. And repayment rates are over 97, 98% traditionally. No interest comes back to you as the lender, but interest is collected by the microfinance institutions that administer the loans, do training, and collect all the repayments. And it's fair and appropriate. Kiva doesn't work with any organization we think has really high interest rates. So anyway, the product is still very much the same. If you have a little bit of extra, you can lend it to someone else to use, and they will do magical, amazing things with it and give it back to you. And then you can do that again and again. So that's the first thing that I started, first as a project, and then it grew so fast. It became its own beautiful thing. And I feel very, very lucky to have gotten to grow it and birth it from the beginning. It changed who I am. It changed my trajectory as well.
What was the model for fundraising? How did you support the overhead, the operational costs? Was it like a charity water model?
No, it was not. Scott and Vic are great friends, and they've had so many incredible, innovative things. We kind of all started in the same pocket of time, and it's been fun to cheer each other on over the decades. No, we did it a little bit differently. At first, yes, we had a handful of donors that carried us month to month, but because we were dealing with moving at any given time today, millions, tens of millions of dollars back and forth, when you're moving money, there are interesting other opportunities that come up. So I remember in the early days, it was kind of innovative to say, hey, all of your money is going to go to the person that you've identified on this site. All of it will come back if they repay you. I mean, you're taking on currency risk, currency exchange risk and repayment risk that usually works out. Anyway, so in addition to that, if you'd want to add like a tip, you can. Here's a picture of our crumbling office building in the Mission at the time, and the bars and the windows, and it was a little messy. But we would offer it as an optional tip. We were the first crowdfunding, I think, one of the first to do that. I remember I was on a panel once, and Global Giving took funding out of the donation. They were on one side of me on this panel. So if you give 100, only like 95 or whatever it was at the time goes to the end cause. And I remember Global Giving was on the other side. I'm sorry, Global Giving was one side. Donors Choose was sitting next to me on the other side, and they would add it on top, but it was mandatory. We were optional, and it was whatever you want. And we ended up being able to cover costs many times throughout the life of the organizations just from the optional tip. And when you think about it, you get into the psychology of that. The person who's being generous at the time as a lender, giving, it was hard to convince people that it was a loan anyway, so giving a little more on top was not a big deal to them. So we often exceeded, what we would budget and plan for. But the other thing is, once you have the money moving back and forth, it's very carefully and safely invested while it waits, coming back, And I shouldn't speak for the team today, but that's how we did it in the past. And then you get a lot, then you can do more traditional philanthropy too. And it's not a bad thing to seek out high net worth donors and foundations and other funding when you can get it. But what we really believed and wanted to always design around was the power of an everyday person to be able to contribute and make change and really participate in this unfolding story with someone else and play a different role in that.
You strike me as this Venn diagram of entrepreneur, starter. Then second circle is rolling up your sleeves, wanting to do the work of making the world better, life on life, working with people. And then this third circle being teacher, presenting ideas, drafting intellectual things, making them simple to maybe foment movement or whatever it might be at a pretty significant level, right? You're not at a small school that's kind of unknown out there in the corner of a city. Which one are you more? If you had to give more energy and emphasis to one of those three, rolling up your sleeves, doing the work regardless of title, position, power, influence.
That one. That's the one. The middle one. I feel like I understand entrepreneurship to be a thing that I make it mean what it means to me, and it's really very much about that second piece. But I came to the understanding of what it was and how it might name what I was doing later. I never thought I'm going to go be an entrepreneur. I love the idea of social entrepreneurship, but look, sometimes I'll have students come up to me and say something like, I really want to be a social entrepreneur. And I'll say, that's amazing. Who do you want to serve? I love my dear friend Simon Sinek, and I think start with why makes sense. And I often ask people to start with who. Who is it that's on your heart? Who do you want to serve? And often people say, I don't know. Okay, is there an issue you care about? I mean, all of them are so important. Okay, is there a place in the world that you see yourself really growing roots or knowing deeply? Or is there a competitive advantage? Like, do you have access to a certain, community by the nature of your lived experience, your lived expertise? And a lot of times there'll be a lot of I don't knows, and that's okay. But I feel like when someone says that, it's like somebody saying, I want to be in the Olympics someday. Oh, what's your sport? I don't know yet. So look, just do the thing itself. So the thing itself for me is getting in there, getting close. I don't know how to think about change other than getting as close as possible to the individuals that you'd like to serve, and then designing with them, for them, around them, and bringing other people who care about that as close as you can. That's just the drumbeat for me. So I think that means I'm the middle thing most. The academic piece is ideas are powerful. Sometimes that is where it starts for people. For me, it's usually been like a, how do I say this? I think the way that I understand myself and life and what I'm doing is always this back and forth, this dance of writing, talking it out, reading, getting the raw material situated over here, getting the language right, and then coming back into the world and putting it into practice. I could never do one without the other. And so it's a sense-making process. My husband, who is a writer, says writing is thinking, and he does his best thinking writing. And I feel that way too. I also think it works for me talking. So I don't know what I think unless I'm in dialogue, unless I'm back and forth with the ideas and the words. I'm usually another thoughtful person like you.
I want to move into the realm now of ideas. I've been waiting long enough, and now I want to go there. But I do want to ask the question, what does it look like for you to make time to roll up your sleeves and do all the things that you said would be your first choice when you are this starter new CEO?
I am super comfortable saying no, and I think that's because I'm very comfortable with confrontation. I find it fascinating and interesting. I don't know if that stems from this very safe foundation that I have growing up, but I think confrontation is this form of intimacy, and I don't fear it because I feel really safe and secure. Anyway, on the saying no front, when you're really clear about who you are and who you're not, then it's super less stressful. It's like making a budget in advance or something. Like, you just know what you're going to say yes and no to. So you just do that. You're not thinking about it every time a decision crosses your plate. You're ready to go. But anyway, and I'm comfortable doing that, and I'm comfortable with confrontation. So that's super helpful. Then I have to say I'm sort of proud of my discipline. So I get up early every day. I always have a minute to myself before the house gets noisy and crazy with my 4 kids and my husband and all the pets and all the things. And that helps me center, have great practices around movement, around meditation, around prioritization for the day. And then it's just, you plow through, you execute. I think the third thing is I cannot say enough how much I've really tried hard to keep growing in this area. But I think when you're a person that does know who you are and who you're not, and has strong priorities, and your currency is like getting the thing done, and you love to be engaged, it's very hard to hand off pieces and delegate. But I have so many different wonderful teams and team members right now that it's just so beautiful to learn more and more how to be a manager of multiple different things and watch very capable individuals, really smart individuals, take and run with parts of the vision that you have for the thing that you're doing. So there's no way I could get all these things done or wear all these hats without really highly capable teams that are super functional. So those are a few ideas about it. But I think also anyone who's a parent out there, you want something done, give it to a busy parent, because there is mission critical and there is everything else. And hopefully I'm getting better and better at seeing, even with prioritization and saying yes and no, but really understanding what does need to get done and what can wait or not get done.
I do want to talk about culture. I don't know if you have a strong POV on this. I know it's not exactly a lot of what you write about, but I think it's important, and I'm sure you agree. And a lot of what we've talked about today, I think it touches on the subject of culture. And one of the things I find in the nonprofit space is that of all the organizations that should be stewarding, cultivating healthy culture, the most intentionally, we often are the ones who do it the least intentionally, because we just operate from this assumption that, like, well, you're doing work you love and you care about, therefore culture's great. Or often in the faith-based space, well, you're doing work with your church and God, and like, how we don't have to like work on culture. Culture is what we do. And then ironically, the highest rates of burnout, frustration, fatigue, failure are in these spaces, right? How do we fix that? For God's sake, it's like, I feel like in the nonprofit space, we're the worst offenders when it comes to actually investing in the development, care, leadership, nurturing of our people. Do you agree? Do you see that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, luckily, I've read a great book on this. I don't know if you've heard of it. There's a yellow cover. No, really, truly, I really appreciate it. I was going to pull it and show it off, but it's in my office.
That's so cool. It's actually, I'm like fanboying right now that you said that. So thank you.
No, I'm totally serious. Not just a plug. I'm an unpaid spokesperson. I promise. This was not a, not hashtag ad or whatever. So do I agree that we overlook culture, especially in organizations that tend to focus on mission? I do, and I think we mistake mission as a proxy for culture, but what you're focused on, what your goals are, that doesn't shape how you get it done and how you treat each other and what stories you tell and what practices you commit to and you champion. So yes, I think that gets mistaken.
I mean, I think I'm obviously, this is an area I spend a lot of time in as a consultant and as a writer and teacher. And I obviously have strong opinions. I think what I'm always curious to understand is it as bad as I think it is? And what is the answer? Is the answer just greater mindfulness, intention? Is it like what? Or is it something deeper? Or is it just case by case? Like,
I'd like to say the answer is simply intention. I'm curious. I've not quite unpacked these ideas from this angle. And I'm wondering, what's coming to mind for me is what we just talked about, which is confrontation, intimacy. So when you're working in a place where people's values are front and center by the nature of what they've chosen to do and how they spend their time, there's a different investment. I think there are different associations and ties to identity and really deep stuff that if you're all just there to make money, that's over here, and you'll do whatever you're going to do to get there. Culture can be quite separate because it lives in this different world. But when values, mission, purpose, impact, all these kinds of words, intent, and sacrifice, I mean, it's a tricky topic, but people are giving something. Everyone's giving something up, but it's a little more elusive. When you're in a nonprofit setting, there's also a lot of assumptions that you come in with, perhaps more than in all the other things, the whole other kingdom of traditional for-profit businesses. I think there's lots of different flavors, lots of different styles, and we might all understand that to be true at an a priori level. But when you're talking about nonprofits, there's like a bit of a monomyth of what you can be, how you show up, what you can ask for. Dan Plata's written and talked a lot about some interesting ideas here, but actually to my series, the LinkedIn series, look, 501c, it's a tax code, not a religion, I've said before. There are lots of other tax codes you can use. They each have advantages. They each have responsibilities and some burdens, depending on what capital you want to get. How much, if any, can the recipient of the thing you make or do pay for that thing? There's all these pieces around incentives and again, like opportunities that you might be able to access, and how fast you want to move, right? There's some that are faster vehicles to get where you want to go. Anyway, I'm all over the map here. Let me say this. I think this is such an interesting question to think and talk about. I think because people show up more with their hearts front and center, in work of the church, in work of a typical nonprofit or NGO, there's a lot more at stake when we might confront weaknesses around culture and how people operate when they're leading with heart. It's more personal. It might feel more personal to people. It might feel more threatening. It might feel more dangerous for them, because it's not just like a means to an end. It's the thing itself. People are often there to be together and connected and tied to all that good stuff.
I think you've articulated it really well. And I think what this reminds me is this notion that tension is a strength if harnessed and led and facilitated well in our organizations. And too often I find in the nonprofit space a fear of tension, because either we don't have time, the work we're doing is hard enough. The last thing we want to do is actually have a conversation about whether you really believe what this organization presumes about theology or sexuality or fill in the blank, right? So it's like a don't ask, don't tell. And I think at some point that creates sideways energy and friction that drains people, because it's a presumptive culture that's almost at times tribal, instead of a truly safe place where you can talk about the things you're wrestling with. I think, and this is often where faith-based. So anyways, I think that theme of how do we facilitate tension and be okay with disagreement on things that might seem important without assuming that it disqualifies somebody from doing the work that we're doing.
Yes. When you just said disqualify, I don't know, that was some sort of emotional spike for me, because I think being a very curious person, having, as we've talked about so many important pieces already, studied philosophy and other things. I like being data-driven. I like asking hard questions. I like letting truth prevail. And I think that you have to have a security, right? And there has to be commitment there. So I wonder if a rearticulation of commitment within boundaries, or given certain boundaries, I should say, would be helpful in those cultures. Like, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to, well, by the way, there's also just the way things have been done. And anything new and disruptive questions the worth itness of whatever might have been done before that. And so I'm curious, you would know the answer to this question. I'll put it back to you. I wonder if you think the nonprofit sector or churches have a more static culture than other organizations, so that there's more at risk when change might come in to play.
Yeah, we need another hour on that, Jessica. Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but I think that we in the nonprofit space are often guilty of becoming our own end instead of a means to a greater end. And when we become the end, we're actually afraid of people who are questioning our existence or innovating ways that might actually require a whole thing that's been working well in fundraising to end.
Right.
And I think sometimes the status quo or the homeostasis of our thing is the greatest threat to the actual cause we're supposed to be fighting for.
Mm-hmm. Well, you even said earlier, you used this word to talk about Kiva and your exit from Kiva. And I didn't even actually get to that piece, but that's fine. Happy to if you want. But there are not clear exits for nonprofits besides ones that are, again, back to the personal sacrifice theme, which we also didn't touch on a ton, but Puritan roots, et cetera. We can talk about it. Success is putting yourself out of a job, or at least doing well enough to be forced into a pivot or to iterate so aggressively that you're going to be doing something very new and different than what you're doing today. That's really hard for people to wrap their minds around and to genuinely and authentically work for, because it threatens one's current state of existence. So yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about this idea of philanthrocapitalism that the you said it earlier, not 501c3 or C4 is a tax status. It's not something that has unique sacrosanct protection or elevation in the minds of millennials, or certainly not Gen Zs. And frankly, in my experience, many for-profits compete on mission better than nonprofits do. Tom's Shoes, Patagonia, Tony's, Chocolonely. There's a ton of them that are essentially doing amazing things in the world, Liquid Death. Talk to me about the role and the future of the nonprofit as the world becomes increasingly flat and these lines between nonprofit and for-profit become increasingly blurry, it seems to me.
You must read my friend Eric Ries's next book called Incorruptible. Have you read it? Wait, are you smiling because you've already read it?
No. I'm familiar with him. Yeah.
So I feel very fortunate to know him. He's the author of Lean Startup. I mean, it's hard to underappreciate his impact on the startup world, on our thinking. He's coined all sorts of terms you probably use every day. Actually, a few we've already used, pivot, all sorts in our conversation, MVP, whatever. He's amazing. And his next book is called Incorruptible. And I will just say, there's one thing that you do as a next step after you listen to this podcast, everybody, or whatever this becomes. If you're hearing this, please go get his book and read it, because he talks about why companies go bad and how to protect mission over time, short and long term. And there are lots of good ways to start a for-profit company. If you can be a for-profit, go be a for-profit. If you make something in the world that people can pay enough for to sustain you, go do that. That's great. It's much more direct. It's only one audience to serve. You're great. A nonprofit, you're serving two audiences necessarily. You're actually delivering the thing itself to somebody who cannot pay in a way that would allow you to be a sustainable organization or anything, for the thing. And then you have to find someone else that appreciates the story of impact so much, they're going to subsidize and give that money so the other person can get the thing. It's a lot more complicated. I think it's a lot more intellectually interesting, but it has problems. I'm not saying it's a fundamentally problematic model. It's one, I've chosen it very deliberately again and again, and I think it has advantages. However, yes, you can be a for-profit and choose to be mission centers. You really need to be careful, because the traditional ecosystem in which traditional for-profits live, certainly if we look at today and recent decades, that is problematic. It is. There's a gravity. There's a financial gravity. There's gravity and assumptions that people bring into all levels of formal and informal, influence over the company that will, over time, put you at risk for having to compromise. And so I actually did an exercise, I kid you not, in my class last week, where for the last hour of class, I gave them theoretical companies, and they did mission protection steps. So what are the things you can do early, in the middle, later is harder, to protect mission over time? Is it a list of things you will never do? This is our we'll never do list. Is it a checklist of things that every strategic decision, these are the what am I trying to say? The qualities it must have, or the bare minimum qualifications it must meet to be able to move forward. Like, yes, if and only if it meets all these check boxes. There's so many different things you can do, and some of them are legal structures. Eric gets into the weeds on that one, gets into all the details, so go to the book, read it. But yes, if you can start a for-profit, it's a lot more straightforward in a lot of ways. You can start there. That's perfectly fine. Be warned, funders and many others, future shareholders, not just stakeholders, but actual holders can and may have an influence on you to make decisions in a way that will not align with mission. Anyway, I'm trying to summarize an amazing book that's not out yet. It's out in May, in a few sentences here. But is it possible? Of course. Is it risky? Yes. Is the nonprofit or even other hybrid solutions, is that the thing to do instead? Maybe. But there's pros and cons with all of these structures. But again, it's a structure choice. You should ask yourself first, what truly, in your bones, do you actually value? And what do you really want to get done in the world? It's a lot about founder fit too, right? If you say you want impact, but actually that when push comes to shove, you will prioritize profitability over impact, that's good to know. Just be honest about it so that you don't get into a situation where you create a monster. You don't want to be at the helm of an organization 10 years down the line that's functioning in a way that actually is misaligned with what you truly, truly value in the world. So start something that can be pure to what you really want to get done, and then find the structure that fits.
There's been this ongoing growth of nonprofits, new nonprofits, more nonprofits. In the US, we have almost 2-point-something million nonprofits, unique nonprofits. I feel like the winds of change, the shifts in philanthropy, generational shifts are going to change that curve, that dynamic. What do you think? Do you think we'll have more or less nonprofits in America in the next 5 years, or will we see a decline, and why?
I would like to see consolidation, collaboration. I would like to see there being a slightly higher bar for, barrier to entry. I will say, despite the number of new nonprofits starting, you look at the statistics, most won't be here in 5 years, so they're going to be short-lived. I don't know if it's better or worse for the world to have them be even more short-lived, like more of a flash in the pan. But I think we are in a remarkable moment in time. Things are going to be speeding up, and the competition on all fronts is going to be different. Competition for dollars is going to be different than it has been. So, and for all sorts of other, like I said, currencies a million times in this conversation. So I am less concerned with how many new ones are starting and more interested in what happens with the ones that will last. What is the strategy going to be there to stay in for the long haul?
For more stories from experts in the industry and to learn how to take your nonprofit into the future, like this video, subscribe to our channel and podcast, and visit makehistoric.com/insights. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Ted Vaughn, and this is Future Nonprofit.